America's top diplomat Antony Blinken has wrapped up his visit to China with no major breakthrough on easing tensions. Yet the world's two most powerful economies are talking up his trip, with speculation mounting of a leaders' summit.
U.S. President Joe Biden says ties are on the right trail and felt that progress was made. Chinese leader Xi Jinping says there was progress too, though he gave no details. Mr. Xi's meeting with Mr. Blinken was the culmination of the U.S. envoy's two-day visit aimed at resetting relations after the suspected spy balloon saga. Both pledged to stabilize ties. Their talks lasted half an hour.
It followed more than 10 hours of separate meetings between Mr. Blinken and top diplomat Wang Yi and Foreign Minister Qin Gang, where contentious issues such as Taiwan and Ukraine were discussed. Now, underpinning all of it was the last summit in Bali between Presidents Biden and Xi. They vowed to manage competition without veering into conflict. The Chinese state media says President Xi told Mr. Blinken that Beijing wants to see the common understanding translated into action.
中方是表明了我们的立场，双方同意共同落实好我和拜登总统在巴厘岛会晤时候达成的共识。双方在一些具体的问题上呢也取得了进展，达成了共识，这很好。国与国交往啊，总要相互尊重，以诚相待。我也希望国务卿先生这次访华呀，能够为稳定中美关系多发挥积极作用。
President Biden asked me to travel to Beijing because he believes that the United States and China have an obligation to responsibly manage our relationship. The United States is committed to doing that. It's in the interest of the United States, in the interest of China, and in the interest of the world.
Well, the latest, Caroline Malone joins us from Washington, D.C. Caroline, what's the view from Washington on whether anything was achieved and what's needed to keep the momentum going?
Well, from Washington's perspective, the Secretary Blinken was able to bring up and talk about with Chinese officials some of the most important and contentious issues that exist between the US and China. Top of the list there, of course, is Taiwan, and the US was able to reassert that it does support the One China policy. At the same time, it also has a Relations Act that means it can support Taiwan to defend itself, but that overall Washington doesn't want to see a change in the status quo on any sides. Blinken was also able to bring up North Korea and interest in Beijing using its influence over Pyongyang to stop North Korea from doing its ballistic missile testing. And also on Ukraine, China reasserted that it would not be giving lethal weaponry to Russia to help in its cause and its fighting in Ukraine. Some important topics that were covered there. However, one thing that the US came to the table with that wasn't agreed to is to reopen military communications between the two nations. However, Blinken came away from that trip saying that some progress was made, but that progress really does take time. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
In terms of those objectives that we set for this trip, establishing open communications channels, directly raising issues of concern, exploring cooperation in places where it's in our mutual interest to do so, we did all of that on this trip. But progress is hard. It takes time. And it's not the product of one visit, one trip, one conversation.
Now, President Biden said on Monday after the Blinken's trip that he's happy with how it went, that Blinken did a great job, and he does see that US-China relations are on the right track.
All right, Caroline, thank you very much for that. Caroline Malone in Washington, D.C. for us. For more insight on the takeaways from Secretary Blinken's visit to Beijing, joining us this morning from New York is Dr. Evan Medeiros. He holds the Penner Family Chair in Asia Studies and the Kling Family Distinguished Fellow in U.S.-China Studies at Georgetown University. Doctor, so the meeting between Blinken and President Xi did actually happen, with both sides talking up the talks. Can we be optimistic of a potential thaw in U.S.-China relations? And do you think his visit can be labeled a success overall?
I do think his visit can be labeled a success. I think it's too early to be optimistic. But the most important thing is that the visit stopped the free fall in the relationship. It stopped a rapid deterioration in the relationship captured in a recent unsafe, unprofessional naval maneuver on the part of the Chinese. So I think that Blinken's trip opened up high-level channels of communication. It redirected a deteriorating relationship in a more constructive direction. But where that goes and how the relationship responds to the inevitable problems in the future remains an open question. So I think that the relationship is more stable now, but let's see how long it lasts and whether or not the relationship is resilient in the face of unanticipated events in the future.
Chinese state media say that President Xi told Mr. Blinken that Beijing wants to see the common understanding that they've sort of come to translated into action. What would be an example of this?
Well, I think there are a couple things on the agenda. Number one would be the establishment of joint working groups to work on some of the most practical problems in the relationship, resuming or increasing air flights between both countries, working on the problem of fentanyl shipments, illegal fentanyl shipments to the United States. I think another area would be expanding our cooperation on food security, expanding our cooperation on global macroeconomic management. These are all issues that are relevant to both the United States and China. The question is can we actually find areas to cooperate? And I think that both sides are interested, but it is going to be a challenge to actually determine if they can turn a political commitment into real work.
And Dr., we heard Chinese President Xi saying that China will not challenge or replace the U.S. He also expressed hope for the return of healthy and stable relations. And what did you make of the tone of his statement? Perhaps a shift in position? What's your take?
No, I don't see it as a shift in position at all. I think it's the Chinese have said this before. They've said it for many years. But from an American perspective, the problem is the Chinese say one thing and they do another thing. And I think that there are many Americans that are concerned that the Chinese are trying to replace a rules-based order with a more China-centric order captured in big major initiatives by Xi Jinping, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and now the Global Culture Initiative. So I think the tone the Chinese sought to project was one of trying to be constructive. But I think the Chinese appreciate that there are some really hard issues at the heart of this relationship. Differences over Russia, Ukraine, differences over Taiwan, differences over basic values. And it's unclear that both sides are going to be able to manage those problems going forward.
Speaking of that, how might the outcome of Blinken's visit affect other countries in the region, such as Taiwan, but Japan too? How will they see these meetings?
I think the region warmly welcomed the meetings. An intense, unpredictable U.S.-China strategic competition where their militaries aren't talking makes everybody in the region nervous. So I think it will be broadly welcomed in the region. The question that everybody's asking is, can it be sustained? And how are the United States and China going to continue these conversations amid differences over Russia, Ukraine, over Taiwan? Can they translate the constructive outcomes of Blinken's meeting into months long of cooperative behavior? And that remains a big open question. My best guess is that we'll have about 4, 5, maybe 6 more months of stable relations leading up to Xi Jinping's likely visit to the United States to participate in the APEC multilateral meeting in November. But after that, after Xi Jinping pays a visit to the United States, I think that the future of the relationship becomes an open question again.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, we are expecting a potential trip to China by U.S. economic officials like Treasury and Commerce Secretaries Janet Yellen and Gina Raimondo. And as you said, could lead to possibly Biden-Xi summit. But as such high-level interactions resume, what kind of game plan or objectives should Washington have to not squander this chance to stabilize ties with Beijing?
I think that's the key question, is what is Washington's game plan? And I think it's a combination of continuing these high-level meetings to demonstrate a commitment to stable, constructive relations, using those meetings to actually drive progress. And by progress, I mean commitments and behavior that are practical, tangible, and visible, where both sides are working to solve problems and working to enhance cooperation. So meetings are just meetings. The question is, can you translate those meetings into practical work on challenging issues? And I think that is going to be the real key to determine whether or not the relationship is on a new and more constructive trajectory, or whether both sides are effectively just using the remainder of the year to buy time to get back past Xi Jinping's visit to APEC, and then we're going to be back at intense, unpredictable competition.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Thanks very much for your perspectives this morning, Dr. Evan Medeiros there from Georgetown University.